Welcome to the ICOACHKIDS Spotlight series.
We'll be joined by world-leading coaches, researchers and practitioners sharing their expert insights.
All of these insights are to help us in our mission to champion sport policy, education and practice that puts kids first.
Be sure to join us at ICOACHKIDS.org to learn, coach and connect.
So let's dive in.
Professor Rhodri Lloyd, welcome to the ICOACHKIDS Spotlight series. Thank you for coming on, and it's great to talk to you today.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Yeah, thanks for inviting me along.
No worries. So we're here today to talk about the importance of planning progressive programs for children and young people, which is the 8th item of the ICOACHKIDS pledge. So we're specifically going to dive into more around talking about long-term approach to learning and development. So it would be great to start with some background on this area. And so just an open question to start. Why is it important to have a long-term view to development?
Yeah, I guess a topical first question. And I suppose as I reflect back on the work of not just our group, but the folks at Leeds Beckett, people all over the world really in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been this sort of, I guess, increased awareness and importance placed on the topic. And I mean, things come into vogue, and sometimes I feel, it's quite fortunate the timing of, I guess, my career alongside the way that LTAD has really sort of exploded. And, I think really the crux of it is that, the whole issue or the whole context of LTAD is really about trying to develop athleticism in all the kids that we come across. So whether that's your, child who's engaging in just a bit of recreational physical activity or PE once or twice a week, or if that's your elite and high level performing young athlete, and anywhere in between, it's really about us trying to lay foundations and trying to avoid, I guess, a focus on short-term wins in athletic performance, whether that's, some short-term gains in strength or speed, and really about developing a rich breadth and diverse set of skills in kids. So the way I always view it is that hopefully by the time, we hand those kids over at maybe sort of under 17s, under 18s, under 19s, and the academy coaches, as an example, sort of look at them and say, all right, what can they do? We're able to say, well, they can do everything. They're able to run with good technique. They're able to change directly and decelerate with real good mechanics, and their relative risk of injury is low. They can lift, they can jump, and I think if we have that approach, rather than just sort of saying, I'm just going to get my athletes super strong squatting or super strong in a power clean, and just really focusing everything around, a really narrow band of not just exercises, but physical qualities. I think the whole premise of LTAD is that we gradually build these attributes in kids over a longer period of time, and that we don't, I guess, chase the short-term wins at the expense possibly of either technical correctness or competency, and that we're not basing our programming purely on the sport that the child at 8, 9 or 10 years of age has shown a passion and interest for. It's probably going to be more generic to certainly in the early stages of that program. And I think what we've seen with maybe some of the athletes that have come through our centre over the years, it's the ones that have been consistently accessing the program. It's not always about having a million different exercises and the latest training trends that you see online. It's just about really good quality training and having consistent access and exposure to it, and they tend to be the athletes that, all right, the performance level on a sporting side is is a little out of well, it is out of our control, I guess. But they're the ones who really, from an athletic perspective, get to that place of what I would say is an elite level, sort of level of performance.
Brilliant. Okay, and can you just give us a bit of background around that program that you're talking about that those athletes are in?
Yeah, no problems. So at Cardiff Metropolitan University, so I've been there now since 2012. I was there previously as a student as well, and probably from about 2015, Professor John Oliver and we co-founded the Youth Physical Development Centre. So it's an after-school program that we run for younger athletes in the area. We've never really been, I guess, constrained to say that, we want really high-level athletes coming in. We've had school teams, we've had players involved in NGBs, we've had some more recreational level kids. And that was sort of the way we operated it sort of pre-pandemic. And then obviously, as you can imagine, we sort of, with all the lockdowns and whatnot, it took us a little while to get back on our feet. So we almost re-established, or I guess reopened the doors around October time last year. And we've changed a little bit now. So we're working very closely with a large football academy within the university. So we have one of those in place. We've got about 140 kids that will come through on a given week. And that ranges from 8 years of age through to sort of 16, 17 years of age. And the team of us, so that's academic staff who are also involved in, I guess, the delivery side. We coach in there, and we also have then some students that will come in on sort of work-based learning opportunities with us. So it really serves as a way in which we can provide that provision to younger athletes to help support them, and we also then, as a result of them being involved in our program, we're able to collect data and use that to inform prescription and like the direction we're taking the program, but also obviously then to generate data that we use for research outputs. So that's kind of the way it works.
Sounds like a fantastic setup.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's never easy balancing, whether you're a full-time coach and you're doing academic study alongside, or whether it's vice versa. It's getting that balance isn't easy, and it takes time, but it's a rewarding thing to do, and it's great. We have a pretty sort of tight-knit group of academics who, not intentionally, we just sort of have come together in this sort of space around LTAD and pediatric strength and conditioning, and I guess we've got a bit of a critical mass now of staff and students.
Perfect. Okay, and so just on that, do you think looking at a long-term view of development is important for all coaches and at all levels? Yeah,
so I mean, I guess I'd look at that question in two ways, really. So if I take coaches who are involved with younger children, then it's really, really important that there is that consistent messaging, so if the technical coach isn't aligned with what we're trying to do or maybe not aligned, but maybe doesn't necessarily understand or appreciate what we're trying to do from an athletic development perspective. So from a technical standpoint, they might be very focused and drill down on developing sporting techniques, and you can completely understand that. But I guess with, one of the pillars of this LTAD approach would be around trying to use some sampling and giving them a breadth of exposure to different types of activities and skills. So I think it's really important then, especially in those early years, that there is an allowance amongst all the people involved. And that's not just the technical coaches and, us as S&C coaches, but that would be really important as well from the parents and the role, the significant role that parents will have in this whole process is just enormous. And I think, if they can understand what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, then that really can be a powerful sort of leverage. And I think what we try and do is ensure that the kids understand it. And it's not always, sometimes we sort of say that quite loosely, don't we? And the kids really understand our program, but I'm not sure they always get it, and they don't always understand why they're doing certain exercises or phases of the training program. But we educate as much as we can, and we try and get them to get that sort of, I guess, sense of empowerment. And I think then as you know, if you've got that really long-term view for when the kids, the younger children come in, well, as you go through adolescence and you're getting towards adulthood, you know, I think it's unrealistic to think that, you know, coaches and governing bodies aren't going to be concentrating then on performance more. You would expect that, right, as the children go through those different stages of maturity and development, and they're entering closer to adulthood. But certainly through what I would call the developmental stages, you know, through childhood and through to adolescence, then having that long-term view is really important. And I think another example there would be, let's say you are working in an academy setup as a coach, and you know, you have a 15, 16-year-old come into your program, and from a rugby or a hockey or a football perspective, they might be, you know, have a good training history behind them for the sport. I'd say it's quite often they won't necessarily have that same level of experience from a strength and conditioning or a training standpoint. And I think the risk then is that you almost say, all right, well, I'm just going to immerse this 15 or 16-year-old in the same training program that these kids have been doing for 5-6 years. And, you know, that's a classic example where you almost need to separate the two things and say, right, well, yes, they're coming into this squad in terms of their sport performance, but actually from an S&C standpoint, we're probably going to be starting with quite rudimentary type training methods, and you still have to try and apply a little bit of a longer term approach, I think, to the way you go about training them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've seen academy setups where that is often done, and it can be quite dangerous if they've not got that technical understanding of S&C, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, look, it's sometimes really easy to you know, to pass judgment or pass comment when you don't understand the context of some of the academies and the way, the environments that they have to work in. And you know, I think if I reflect back on my time in this area, so when I first got into it, I guess, you know, you had some pioneers in the field of pediatric exercise science and youth resistance training. That was all there. But I think, you know, over the last 10 to 15 years, I've certainly seen, you know, you've just got to look at the kind of the jobs that have become available. You know, there's definitely more focus and emphasis being placed on the development of younger athletes, and we're seeing strength and conditioning coaches in schools. You're seeing them at different age groups within football academies as a good example, and they do some brilliant work. And I think it's just about, you know, whether you're in, as I said earlier, you know, 100% coaching, or whether you're in academia, you know, everyone's driving in the same direction. I think the industry has really taken big strides forward in the last 10 to 15 years, and you know, hopefully we can just continue to spread the message.
Yeah, great. Okay, so it'd be great to talk a bit about your academic research as well. And so the youth physical development model, can you explain a little bit about why you created the model and what's involved in that model?
Yeah, no problem. So this was, so I was John Oliver's PhD student back in the day, when I had less grey hairs, but we've been working on some publications. We put various papers out, and we kind of got to a point where we'd been involved in some sort of critical reviews of existing, I guess, LTAD literature, and you know, we'd sort of questioned some of the, I guess, or the lack of empirical evidence behind some of the other models. And we just got to a point where we said, well, instead of just going down that road of sort of critiquing other people's work, we thought we would try and develop a model that we felt was more, I guess, representative of the literature base. And the model came about, I think we published in 2012, so we were probably working on it for maybe a year before that. And the best sort of compliment I've had about it was from a practitioner who said, oh yeah, that kind of made sense, and it was sort of common sense. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it kind of, I think, aligned with a lot of practitioners' views on how it should be done. It was just, I guess, maybe one of the first manuscripts that have tried to pull it all together in one place. So really what we're trying to do with that model is to say that, look, rather than being, I guess, pigeonholed to specific windows of opportunity, there's a term that's been used previously, we're trying to say that, look, whether you're a 6-year-old, whether you are a 15-year-old who's, gone through the growth spurt, whether you're someone who's bang in the middle of that growth spurt, all those types of children can make meaningful improvements in fitness. And by the term fitness, I say, the whole range of athletic qualities that we have in that model, from speed, strength, power, all the way down to sort of endurance. So, that was a bit of a change, I think, in tact from previous work. And I guess the other thing that is probably prominent in that model is that we have an ongoing focus on motor skill development and on muscle strength development. And the reason for that is those two things are just so influential on a number of the other fitness components. So, being able to move with good quality is really, really important in terms of motor skill competency, but then also having the ability to reduce, absorb force is just crucial. So there's no point in having a perfect looking lunge pattern if, as soon as you go anywhere near some sort of load, you fall to pieces. And what some of our research, so Andrew Picardo, one of our PhD students down in AUT, he showed that actually those with greater levels of strength were more likely to produce better scores in a movement screen resistance training skills battery. So, those things, rather than being looked at where you have motor skill here and strength over here, we tend to sort of say, like, they probably need to be trained together, sort of synergistically, to try and ensure that we're giving the athletes the best chance. And that's not just from a performance standpoint, that's also from an injury prevention standpoint. And when you look at the physical activity literature, then just sort of generally around pediatric exercise science, there's some data to sort of indicate, well, those who are better quality movers earlier on in their childhood years, and importantly, those who have a greater perception of their motor skill abilities, are probably more likely to engage in physical activity and organized sport later on into adulthood. So that's really, I guess, the overarching things from the model. And as I said, it's been great to sort of see it being applied and people leaning on that model. But it was I guess a culmination of lots of other people's work that we just sort of tried to pull into one piece, I think.
Well, still a very useful piece that you did. So I found it really interesting when you said the model is useful and can be applied to coaches with a 6-year-old or a child in the growth spurt. But what about a coach who has a year group, say, under 12s? And within that year group, there's still individual differences. How can a coach apply the model there?
Yeah. So within the model, we've obviously aligned. We have sort of chronological age at the top, and then we've sort of put that against typically where we would sort of see key, I guess, maturity milestones, if you like. And we've kind of used peak height velocity as a bit of a reference point, as lots of work will do. And I think one thing that's important, and John and I are working on a second version of the model, a bit of an update. And what we've made sure is present in the new model is a focus around competency, because sometimes I think people in the past may have looked at that model and said, all right, well, there's this bigger slant around maturity status and maturation. So what we've tried to do over the years is make sure that people are aware that we don't have a pre-peak height velocity training program, just like we wouldn't have an 11-year-old's S&C program. So it's really about what really contributes and drives your decision making when it comes to putting a program together. And the number one for us really is around what is it that child needs from an adaptation point of view, and that's common whether you're working with, you know, elite level Olympians or entry level athletes, and importantly, what can they do? So you may have developing high levels of neuromuscular power as being your key driver in terms of adaptation, but if a child can't move well and has absolutely low levels of strength, then it's not going to be an appropriate thing to give them advanced weightlifting techniques. So once I think we've got those two things in place, then we can start to sort of say, right, well, what's their maturity status? And that's another piece of the puzzle that you start to put in. So the actual training program that ends up being created, a lot of work and thought goes into that. And maturity status or maturation itself is probably one of those key ingredients. But I think, you know, over the years, what have not just myself but our group noticed, I think there's probably some consistencies almost irrespective of maturity status, in that typically children don't have amazing levels of movement proficiency. Their relative levels of strength probably aren't where we would like them. And as a result, they tend to be, you know, fairly common things that we would look to try and work on. But that said, what we can then start to do is say, right, well, if we know that this athlete is pre-peak height velocity, as an example, some of our research and research of other people and others around the world have sort of shown the effectiveness of, as an example, plyometric training during that stage of maturation. So it's almost, you know, the neural changes that a child will be experiencing. If you then sort of say, well, we'll superimpose the neural type of stress and stimulus that plyometric training or strength training will give them, that then becomes quite a potent almost interaction between maturity status and the training stimulus. And then if you flip it and you go more towards maybe post-peak height velocity, closer to sort of peak weight velocity, maybe around sort of 12 months later, you know, the natural hormonal profile of those adolescents is probably going to mean that they're more susceptible, if you like, to making increases in size and in muscle size. So, right, well, would that be a better time to maybe give them a little bit more of a sort of a hypertrophic dosage to try and take advantage of what's happening as a result of natural development? So I think that's sometimes the way that the maturity data can be used cutely in relation to programming decisions.
Yeah, that was really interesting. What about for coaches who coach girls separately to boys and also mixed groups? Does the model differ for gender?
Yeah, so in terms of sex differences, the model is almost exactly the same. You know, whether you're working with females, whether you're working with males, they're still going to need the same types of qualities, right? So sometimes in the past, maybe female athletes have been looked at as a special population, which, you know, that's not the case. They have certain, I guess, biological processes that they will go through that from a coaching perspective we need to be aware of. But actually, you know, in terms of improving movement control, strength, power, speed for a lot of sports, it's exactly the same principle, right? But what we tend to see if we almost align those models is that females tend to experience maturity or maturation at a slightly earlier stage. So if you look at the two models, one above the other, you can sort of see that the females will experience those changes slightly earlier, which we might need to be aware of. And in terms of I guess two things for me, a mixed sex group and a mixed ability group are probably slightly different things. You know, we've had boys and girls training the exact same, you know, completing the same sessions, no problem at all. Mixed ability, I think it then really boils down to your ability to differentiate as a coach. So even though you might have let's say you've got muscle strength as a key outcome for a training session or a training block, however you're approaching it, then you could probably give that sort of strength training stimulus to the whole squad that you're working with, but you might vary the exercise selection, you might vary the range of motion, you might vary the velocity of the movement, the complexity of the movement. We can individualize training at so many different levels. It doesn't mean that you have to have an annual plan for 120 kids in your academy. I mean, like, you would never, and you wouldn't coach, right? You would just be writing programs all the time. So I think even if you had something that was slightly more generic across your team, you can always individualize. And we've done it previously. So Dr. Sylvia Muscops, I should say. So she's a colleague of ours, and she's worked with gymnasts and developed a really neat program. They had some consistent themes in terms of like your standard traditional resistance training exercises, but pre and post, there were some individual little work-ons that related to what we'd seen in a movement screen or potentially what we knew in terms of injury risk. And that's no different to what people are going to be doing in lots of different sports. But I guess it's just about trying to, the biggest thing for me is that you coach what you see in front of you. And that's just about saying, right, I'm going to take everything I know from a scientific perspective in terms of what do I understand from a training science point of view, what do I understand from a pediatric exercise science growth and development point of view, and I put all that in to my decision making in terms of then what I see, this group of 13-year-olds, and these are particularly, or these might be weaker, these might be poorer movers, these may be slower, and then how do I go about apportioning that session to hit the needs of the individual?
Great. Okay. And so just on that, can you give any of our listeners that are coaches out there some tips on how to apply a long-term approach to their training?
Yeah, okay. So I'll try and I think I get the question. So if I relate it back to the model, then I would say that the YPD model almost serves as your top level. So that's going to give you your general guidance in terms of, right, if we have an 8-year-old child, then, or an 8-year-old boy as an example, then these, if you look at the model, this is realistically what they should probably be targeting, right? So the big emphasis on movement skill and muscle strength, right? So that we know that, and then it then sort of feeds down into, right, well, what does my annual plan look like in terms of the child's school commitments, the sports that they're playing, and then as you work through any sort of periodized model, going through your macro cycle right down to the training session level, it's about making sure that the gains that you're trying to get on a year-on-year basis actually look to develop that athlete holistically over a period of time. So I always say it's better to go slightly slower than too fast. And the kids that we've worked with, they need, it's a real fine balance, I think. You need an element of repetition. They need to see skills more than just once, okay, in order to get that sort of level of mastery. But we also try and elicit a little bit of variation to keep things novel and fun and engaging. So, to answer your question around how do you apply LTAD principles, we've written about that in the NSCA position statement that we published 2016, and I think training programs or these sorts of LTAD pathways are so context specific, right? So if I'm working in a professional football academy, I get to see the kids 4 times a week, and they have their own challenges, but that's going to be a different environment and context to working with just PE classes on a twice a week where you've got some disengaged kids and it's all been delivered through PE. So rather than sort of saying, oh, you know, this is the secret formula, this is how it works, our NSTA position statement, we just sort of put together 10 pillars that we sort of said, look, if your program is addressing these, then, you know, we feel as though you're doing a decent job. And there's always going to be these subtle variations based on what facilities you have, how many people are working with you. Do you have a good working relationship with a technical coach? Do you have a technical coach? You might be the same person. So there are so many moving parts. It's really just about making sure, I think, that those principles are probably applied, that we're taking into account growth and maturation, we're encouraging a sampling approach early on, we're delivering or giving a training dosage to target fitness development, but also to make sure we're reducing the risk of injury. We've got some kind of monitoring in place, and that's it can be so difficult, right? So if you've got a school of 1,500 kids and you're the PE teacher and we're saying, well, you should be doing some monitoring, it's like, oh my God, it's almost impossible, isn't it? So but just having something, whether that's just the I guess maybe a simple form of an RPE to, you know, your more advanced techniques, whatever it is, but they're the sorts of things I think are really important. But I would say that the one thing that this always boils down to, it's not necessarily about how well you understand all of the nuances of the scientific principles. It's not whether you've read about every single type of training model that there possibly is. It's quite often about when you've got a group of 20 kids in front of you who may have been in school all day and it's been a wet playtime and they're just charged a high, you know, super enthusiastic. Are you able to work with that group? And, you know, a big term for me is about inspiring, and that's inspiring them to really work hard in the session, but then that's also giving them that environment where, you know, they feel they're benefiting from the session and they want to come back the next week. And I think if that is so important, it's at the heart of everything, and then we put all the other pieces around it. That's, I think, when you have the successful models.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we're on to our last final section where we ask all our guests 3 quick fire questions. So the first one, what is...
Yeah, I think a little bit like my last response, I think this is where we see people who can inspire and people that have the child at the center of their decision making. And this is a quick fire response, so yeah, I'll leave it there on that one.
Great. Number 2, what is one thing you would change about youth sport to make the experience better?
Yeah, this is a more difficult one because I don't like to just bash the youth sport industry, but I think I would encourage parents to give their kids and allow their kids to sample more sports. I think too often we see you know, a child who gets into that particular sport and then almost at some stages feels that they've just got to keep doing it because they're in it. And you know, if a child wants to transition from netball to go and play some hockey, then that's absolutely fine. And then 6 months later, they may want to go back to the sport they were previously in. And I think having that flexibility is really important.
Fantastic. Okay, and last one, what is the biggest difference in sports coaching now compared to when you first started?
Oh, I mean, I think the volume of research and sort of scientific understanding now has undoubtedly improved, right? And if you just looked at a PubMed return online and you looked at the sort of the papers around long-term athletic development or youth resistance training, you know, you can sort of see this surge, and I think it is filtering down to coach ed programs. You know, we've delivered coach ed stuff ourselves, and coaches have really engaged with it. I know that Kev Till and Ben Jones and Stacey, they've done a brilliant job at Leeds Beckett doing, you know, similar sort of stuff. Colleagues have worked with the ECB and the and local football teams at University of Gloucester. So, you know, I think maybe it's just I'm a romantic at heart, but I think that the industry is trending in the right direction. You know, is it where we want it to be? No, we've got more work to do, and there are improvements to make. But you know, it's a hell of a lot different to when I first got into it. You know, sort of 15 odd years ago.
Super. Okay, this has been a fantastic conversation. And just for our listeners, how can people find out more or follow you further?
Oh, okay, yeah. So I'm not much of a social media person anymore, but my Twitter handle is at Dr. RS Lloyd, so people can find me there. And we also have an at YPD Cardiff Met Twitter handle, so they'll be probably the best options. And then yeah, we've sort of got some books, resources, and lectures and stuff online. So but if anybody wanted to reach out, just more than willing to field emails. So yeah, whenever someone wants some advice, I'm more than happy to give it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on, Roger. It's been great to talk to you today.
No problem at all. My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.